Hello there, my sleepy night friend. Tonight, we're going somewhere strange, somewhere shadowed, somewhere beautiful in a cold and haunted sort of way. Tonight, we are drifting into Gotham City, a place of rain-slick rooftops and endless towers. A city where gargoyles watch from cathedral ledges, where neon glows in puddles like broken stars, and where the night never feels entirely empty. In Gotham, every alley seems to hold a secret. Every old building feels like it remembers something. The wind moves differently between those towers, carrying the feeling that somewhere above the streets, just beyond the reach of ordinary eyes, something is always watching. And tonight, those shadows will open for us. These are not simple stories. They are the kind of stories that feel like half-remembered dreams, the kind that slip into your mind softly and stay there. Strange mysteries, quiet dangers, ancient secrets buried beneath the city, crumbling family legacies, silent streets, endless nights, Gothic towers, whispering archives, the slow beating heart of a city that never truly sleeps. So, as you listen, let yourself sink into it, because tonight's journey through Gotham may give you the wildest dreams, the kind where you are standing on a rooftop above a sleeping city, rain drifting across your face, while far below the streets twist through darkness and golden light. The kind where old cathedrals breathe, where clock towers glow against black skies, where secrets wait beneath stone, and where every shadow feels like the beginning of another story. So get comfortable now, let the day fall away, let your breathing slow, and let Gotham rise around you. And before we begin, if you enjoy these long nighttime stories, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for more journeys into strange and shadowed worlds. Now settle in. The city is waiting. And somewhere in the dark above Gotham, the first story is already beginning. Settle in now. Let your shoulders grow heavy. Let the day slowly drift away from you. Tonight, we are stepping quietly into Gotham, into the long rooftops and rain-washed streets, into the distant glow of street lamps, clock towers, gargoyles, and shadows. Tonight is not about rushing. It is not about noise. It is not about urgency. It is about a slow descent into story. And in this collection, we will wander through Gotham in a softer way. We will move through the city as though we are half dreaming, watching mysteries unfold from a calm and comfortable distance. There will be strange nights and impossible events, old secrets and quiet reckonings, but everything will be told with a slow and steady rhythm, the kind that lets the mind loosen its grip and gently drift. So get cozy now. Let your breathing settle. Imagine the cool night air high above Gotham, where the city stretches beneath the clouds like a map of dim gold and silver lights. Somewhere in that vast sleeping city, a dark figure watches from stone ledges and cathedral spires. Somewhere, a signal glows against the sky. And somewhere, a story is beginning. Tonight's first tale begins with a morning that never arrives. Story 1, The Night That Refused to End. The clock struck 6 in Gotham City, and yet dawn did not come. The hands of the great clock over City Hall moved faithfully forward, as they always had. But the sky above the city remained black and deep and star-filled, as though night had decided it no longer wished to leave. There was no pale silver on the horizon, no soft wash of morning, no sign of the sun climbing over the water beyond the eastern districts. Only darkness settled over Gotham like a heavy velvet curtain. At first, some people thought little of it. Gotham was a city used to unusual things. Storm fronts rolled in from nowhere. Fog swallowed whole streets. Rain could fall for 2 days without pause and leave the city glistening under neon light as though it had been lacquered in shadow. A delayed sunrise for one strange morning did not yet feel impossible. But then the hours passed, and still the darkness held. Below the towers, neon signs bled red and blue and violet into the wet pavement. Their colors gathered in puddles and streaked along gutters, turning the streets into fractured ribbons of electric light. Traffic moved more slowly than usual. Drivers tilted their heads toward the sky at red lights. Office workers exiting subway stations looked around with a strange uncertainty, as if they had arrived too early for the day, and the world had not yet been prepared for them. The city continued, because cities always continue. Coffee was poured, newspapers were stacked, trains arrived and departed. Delivery vans rumbled down alleys, security grates rose in shop windows. But underneath each ordinary action was a question no one could quite answer. Why was morning not coming? By the second day, the city had begun to fray. Meteorologists stood before glowing maps and offered careful explanations in measured voices, speaking of dense cloud banks, atmospheric distortion, unusual conditions over the eastern seaboard. Their language remained technical, but their eyes betrayed uncertainty. Behind the cameras, producers whispered. Technicians checked feeds twice. Anchors smiled the smiles of people trying not to alarm anyone while feeling alarmed themselves. By the third day, even those explanations began to sound thin. The GCPD issued official statements asking the public to remain calm. Utility companies reported no major failures. Hospitals stayed open. Schools shifted schedules. Businesses adjusted. Yet throughout Gotham, people found themselves checking watches and clocks and phones with increasing frequency, as if one of them might finally contradict the sky. But none did. 6 in the morning looked exactly like midnight, and the darkness itself seemed different now. It did not simply cover Gotham. It seemed to settle into it. It seemed to gather in the narrow places between buildings, linger beneath awnings, stretch longer than it should along the sides of churches and courthouses and apartment blocks. In the old neighborhoods where gargoyles crouched above rain-blackened stone and iron fire escapes zigzagged down brick walls, the shadows looked almost attentive. High above the streets, on the ledges and spires few people ever noticed, Batman watched. He stood on a gargoyle that jutted from Wayne Tower, cape shifting slowly in the wind. From that height, Gotham spread out around him in all directions, a dark city painted in neon and sodium gold, a living map of rooftops, bridges, and restless movement. Ordinarily, he knew Gotham by rhythm. He knew the pulse of it. He knew when fear was ordinary and when fear was something else. Tonight, or what should have been morning, was something else. He had already stopped the same robbery twice. Not a similar robbery. The same robbery. The same jewelry store. The same shattered display case. The same 3 thieves wearing the same masks. The same nervous glance from the youngest of the crew before the alarm tripped. Even the same dropped necklace skidding across the tile floor. Only the time had been different. The first time had been 2 hours earlier. The second time had unfolded with such perfect similarity that it felt less like coincidence and more like someone replaying reality itself. In the clock tower, Barbara Gordon sat surrounded by screens and dim pools of blue light. Her fingers moved across keyboards with practiced speed, but even she had begun to slow down, not from fatigue, but from disbelief. Every monitor told the same impossible story. A robbery logged at 1 hour appeared again 3 hours later with identical movements. A traffic collision repeated from another camera angle with different timestamps. Witnesses gave statements that contradicted themselves within the span of minutes. Surveillance feeds showed people in 2 places at once, or doing the same action again and again, like fragments of an edited film being dropped into the wrong sequence. Barbara leaned back in her chair and removed her glasses for a moment, pressing her fingers gently to the bridge of her nose. Something was wrong with time in Gotham. Not time as measured by clocks. Time as experienced by minds. Time as remembered. Time as lived. And that was worse. Because if people could no longer trust the order of events, they could no longer trust themselves. Down on Fifth Avenue, a woman checked her watch and frowned. A few minutes later, she checked it again with the same expression, on the same corner, standing beside the same newspaper box. A waiter inside a diner refilled the same man's coffee 3 times, each time greeting him as though he had just entered. At a crosswalk in the Narrows, a child tugged at her mother's sleeve and asked when morning was coming. Her mother opened her mouth, but said nothing. All through Gotham, small repetitions rippled outward. A city bus circled the same block twice, with the same passengers looking out the windows. A man bought cigarettes, folded the receipt, and moments later appeared to do it again. At a police desk downtown, an officer filed a report and then found that the report already existed in the system, slightly different under the same case number. Batman saw enough to know this was not weather, not mass panic, not rumor. Something was acting on the city itself. Later, in the Batcave, the evidence gathered under cold white light. Environmental sensors had picked up an unfamiliar signal in the air above Gotham. It was not a conventional chemical trace, not smoke, not gas, something stranger. A carrier pattern. An invisible wave that seemed to ride the city's own power grid, spreading through transmission lines, towers, buried conduits, and antenna networks like a whisper moving through steel. Lucius Fox studied the data beside Bruce in silence for a long moment before speaking. "It isn't just controlling light," he said at last. "It is interfering with perception itself." Barbara's voice came through the encrypted channel from the clock tower, calm but strained. "The surveillance contradictions are increasing," she said. "Files aren't stable anymore. Events don't stay where they happened." Bruce stood before the central display as a 3-dimensional map of Gotham rose in pale blue light. Power stations glowed, church spires glowed, old transit tunnels glowed. Abandoned historic sites lit up one after another until at last a pattern emerged, a web centered on one forgotten place. An old cathedral in the oldest part of the city. It stood where Gotham's modern glass could not quite swallow its older bones. St. Erasmus, abandoned for decades, its steeple cracked, its stained glass broken, its crypt sealed and forgotten beneath layers of dust and municipal neglect. Batman arrived there just before what should have been sunrise. The cathedral doors were chained, but the chain had been cut recently. Inside, the nave lay in darkness, lined with empty pews and drifting dust. Rain tapped softly through holes in the roof. The air smelled of stone and mildew and old paper. His boots made almost no sound as he crossed the aisle and descended into the crypt below. There, hidden behind a false wall set into ancient stone, he found something modern. Machines, banks of servers pulsing with blue light, cooling units humming softly. Thick black cables bored through masonry, older than the city grid itself. And on half-corrupted drives, one phrase repeated across damaged files: Umbra Engine. Back above ground, Bruce Wayne attended a gathering at a private Gotham club, where old money still met behind heavy wood doors. The chandelier light was warm. Crystal glasses chimed softly. Voices stayed low. No one there appeared surprised by the endless night, which in itself was strange. He listened more than he spoke. Fragments of conversation drifted toward him. The city is ready. Control the narrative, then control the response. This is only the test phase. A woman in pearls touched his arm lightly as she passed and asked if he would be attending the lodge later that evening. Before he could answer, she vanished back into the crowd. But on her bracelet, he had seen it. A symbol like a horizon line. The same one embedded in the corrupted cathedral schematics. The same one hidden in the electronic signature of the servers beneath the crypt. That symbol led to the Harken Lodge. A modest brownstone to any casual eye. One of many old buildings still standing among the financial towers. Yet, inside, hidden beneath traditional walls and carved banisters, the lodge concealed a very different interior. Batman entered at last through shadows that felt strangely elastic. Time seemed to stretch inside the building. The tick between one breath and the next felt uncertain. Hallways lengthened. Doors appeared where no doors should be. Gas lamps glowed beside steel conduits. Victorian woodwork opened into glass chambers filled with impossible machinery. At the center of it, all stood Dr. Lysander Kimball. Silver-haired, perfectly composed, hands steady over holographic controls. He did not turn when Batman approached. "I wondered when you would find us," he said. Behind him, monitor walls showed Gotham from hundreds of angles, each one flickering through altered versions of the same streets. A robbery with a different ending. A rescue that had never happened. A skyline in which certain towers did not exist. A crime alley in which 2 gunshots became none. Kimball called it healing. He spoke of Gotham as a patient too sick for ordinary medicine. He spoke of the city's violence, its endless cycles, its repeated failures, police reforms that failed, anti-crime programs that failed, vigilantes who won battles and lost years. Each tragedy to him was proof that Gotham's story had to be edited, not endured, rewritten. The Umbra Engine, he explained, was merely the first successful demonstration. By destabilizing temporal perception and weakening memory cohesion, it allowed competing versions of events to enter public consciousness. Once enough confusion took hold, reality could be guided, preferred narratives could be reinforced, unwanted outcomes could be softened, replaced, buried. In his mind, Gotham did not need defenders. It needed authors. Batman listened, but he also watched. Kimball's hands shook only once, when he spoke of his wife. A doctor killed years earlier when gang violence spilled into Gotham General. One death had become the seed of his obsession. If history could not be trusted to produce justice, then history itself must be controlled. Around them, Gotham's elite emerged from the shadows of the lodge. Council members, financiers, heirs to old names carved across public buildings. Each one carrying the quiet exhaustion of people who believed they had outlived every honest solution. They wanted not chaos. They wanted a better city. But they had chosen the most dangerous possible method to achieve it. Batman knew then that this would not be solved by simply shutting down a machine. He would have to stop an idea. Outside, Gotham slipped deeper into temporal fracture. Commissioner Gordon stood under the weakening glow of the bat signal and admitted in a low, tired voice that he no longer trusted his own reports. Officers were filing patrol logs before patrols began. Case files contradicted one another in real time. Witnesses remembered rescues that had been undone. Detectives argued over outcomes that all of them swore they had seen with their own eyes. Even in the Batcave, dates blurred across evidence boards. Bruce returned to Wayne Manor for a single moment of stillness. There, in the study, his parents' portrait seemed almost to shift in the dim light. Not truly moving, but somehow unstable to his exhausted gaze. For one strange instant, he saw not only the life he had known, but 100 possible versions of it. Thomas and Martha alive, Thomas colder, Martha more distant, a Bruce who had never worn the cowl, a Bruce who had joined Gotham's old power structure instead of fighting it. A Bruce who had been remade entirely by the same temptation Kimball now offered. What if the night in Crime Alley had never happened? What if pain itself could be edited out? Alfred's voice grounded him. Some stories must be remembered, not rewritten. That, Bruce understood, was the heart of it. Pain had shaped Gotham, yes. But memory, even painful memory, gave meaning to choice. Without that, a city was not healed. It was hollowed out. So they moved. Barbara synchronized citywide feedback channels. Lucius prepared countermeasures based on Wayne Tech architecture, hidden inside Kimball's stolen designs. Gordon assembled his most trusted officers and equipped them with special lenses to resist the worst of the perceptual distortion. Montoya covered the rear approach. Bullock secured underground exits. Alfred kept the cave system stable as the city's own signals fluctuated. Batman entered the lodge one final time. The interior was worse now. Architecture folded against itself. Ballrooms opened into laboratories. Corridors ended in rooms from earlier centuries. Shards of broken glass hung suspended in the slowed time. Security teams moved with the precision of men who had practiced the same fight over and over through controlled loops. But Batman changed his rhythm. He broke pattern. He moved in ways prediction could not hold. He passed a hall where Gotham's elite danced endlessly in one preserved moment. He crossed a room where technicians worked on machines not yet invented. He descended through layers of the building that seemed to belong to different eras of Gotham all at once, until at last he reached the chamber shared by all versions of the lodge. The heart of the storm. The Umbra engine towered before him, all pale light and impossible geometry. Quantum processors lined the walls. Floating displays ran thousands of simulations. On each one, a different Gotham unfolded. Kimball stood waiting. This was the convergence point, he said. The moment when all possible Gothams could be aligned and one chosen, one corrected, one perfected. He offered Bruce the oldest temptation of all. A city without pain, parents returned, a cleaner story. But Bruce Wayne had already chosen his answer. The past shapes us, he said. It does not belong to you. Then the fight began. It was not loud, though machines screamed around them. It was not wild, though timelines fractured at the edge of the room. It was precise, controlled. Two men driving toward opposite visions of mercy. Kimball fought with the confidence of someone who had already simulated victory. Batman fought with the unpredictability of someone who accepted reality's scars rather than trying to erase them. Across the city, Barbara forced a final command through collapsing systems. Lucius rerouted the engine's output against itself. Gordon's officers anchored key power nodes, preserving the present long enough for the reversal to take hold. Batman reached the controls. His gauntlets interfaced with familiar Wayne architecture buried under Kimball's redesigns. He reversed the polarity of the citywide carrier wave. The machine protested in a shriek of light and data. Then Oracle completed the last containment sequence. The Umbra engine collapsed inward. Its own feedback consumed it. Time snapped back. The sound was like thunder rolling in reverse. Across Gotham, watches resumed simple, honest ticking. Contradictions began to settle. Repeated crimes dissolved into single events. Memories aligned. Files stabilized. Witnesses blinked and looked around as though waking from an uneasy dream. Kimball fell to his knees beside the darkened remains of the engine, watching every perfected Gotham he had imagined compress into failure. "You do not understand what you have done," he whispered. Batman looked out toward the first pale hint of color touching the horizon. "I chose the only Gotham that matters," he said, "the real one." And at last, after 3 impossible mornings, the sun rose. It came slowly, a faint silver behind the eastern towers. Then rose and gold bleeding across black glass and wet brick. Then full daylight touching church roofs, bridges, window frames, and the tops of water towers. Gotham did not cheer. Not all at once. It simply inhaled. People emerged and looked upward. Some laughed, some cried, some checked their watches again and again, just to reassure themselves that ordinary time had returned. On street corners, strangers compared dates and memories. A vendor gave away free coffee to anyone who could correctly name yesterday's baseball scores. No one could. He poured the coffee anyway. At GCPD, officers quietly threw away duplicated reports and started fresh. In the clock tower, Barbara watched clean, stable feeds settle across her screens and finally allowed herself to exhale. In the cave, Bruce sat with a cup of coffee Alfred had placed beside him and watched the city turn golden in the first true morning in days. Was any of it real? He asked softly. All those other versions? Alfred, standing nearby, considered the question. Real enough to tempt the people who wished to believe in them, he said, but not as real as this. And outside, Gotham met the dawn. Not perfect, not purified, not rewritten, only itself. And that, perhaps, was enough. Story 2. The Gargoyles turned north. The gargoyle had moved. Batman noticed it because Batman noticed things other people never would. He had crossed this cathedral roof so many times over the years that every crack in the stone existed somewhere in muscle memory. Every angle, every drainpipe, every weather-worn carving had long ago been added to the silent map in his mind. The horned gargoyle at the eastern ledge had always faced Crime Alley. Tonight, it faced north. Rain tapped against the cowl and ran down the black curve of his cape. Gotham below shimmered in watery halos of orange and white. He crouched still and let the city breathe around him. Then he saw another. A winged figure atop the neighboring roof had turned as well, north. And beyond that, farther off, a line of stone faces seemed to share the same destination. North, always north. Gordon's voice crackled through the comm a moment later, tight and tired. We've got another child missing. Batman closed his eyes for the briefest instant. The 3rd this month. Each disappearance had followed the same cruel pattern. A recently restored building. A child from an old founding bloodline. A locked room, a window facing north. No sign of entry, no witnesses who made sense. By the time he reached the crane building, rain had turned harder, needling across the rooftop in silver lines. Amanda Crane's room was lit softly inside. Detectives moved through it with the hesitant care of people who did not understand what they were looking for. Parents stood in the hall, hollow-eyed, holding each other without comfort. Batman went first to the window. Fresh stone dust lay on the sill. Not ordinary grit from the city. This was finer, damp, almost warm. He rubbed it between gloved fingers and felt something in it that was not purely mineral. Something that prickled. Something that carried the unpleasant sensation of being watched. Gordon lowered his voice as he approached. Third kid. Same age range. Same family pattern. Same north-facing window. Batman looked beyond the glass toward Gotham Cemetery in the distance, its old stones barely visible through sheets of rain. The Gargoyles, he said. Gordon blinked. What about them? They've moved. And then Batman was gone again, dropping into the weather like another piece of it. Later, in the Batcave, ancient city plans spread across vast digital displays. Bruce stood amid them, while Alfred placed untouched tea nearby and watched his expression grow colder with each new discovery. Gotham, Bruce realized, had not simply been built. It had been arranged. Every major building, every cathedral, every courthouse, every grotesque ornament and gargoyle and stone guardian had been placed according to a geometry older than zoning, older than aesthetics, older perhaps than the city itself. His own ancestor's name appeared again and again in the oldest surviving drafts, Solomon Wayne. Beside him, in faded correspondence, another name surfaced, Pinckney, an architect whose final years ended in madness. An architect who believed Gotham was not a city built upon land, but a seal built over something beneath it. Before Bruce could trace the idea further, Barbara called. Amanda Crane had returned. Bruce went not as Batman this time, but as Bruce Wayne, family friend, benefactor, public face. The Wayne Foundation had funded restoration work on half the old structures in the city. His presence at a frightened family's apartment raised no suspicion. What he found there unsettled him more than the disappearance. Amanda sat at her little desk in pajamas, pencil moving steadily across sheet after sheet of paper. The walls around her were covered in drawings. Not childish drawings. Not animals or suns or houses. Architectural plans, complex ones, impossible ones. Buildings folded inward on themselves, streets spiraled and vanished into impossible perspectives. Towers carried thousands of carved faces, all turned toward a central spire, wrapped in the image of a serpent swallowing its own tail. When Bruce knelt beside her and softly said her name, she looked up. Her eyes were still the eyes of an 8-year-old girl, but behind them was something old. Something vast. Something that spoke in perfect Latin when it answered. The foundation beneath the foundation, she said. Then she returned to her drawing. Bruce photographed every page, every line, every symbol. Outside, atop the city's roofs and towers, every gargoyle in Gotham turned another degree north. The drawings led him beneath Wayne Tower itself, to a void that should not have existed. Blueprints insisted the foundation rested on solid bedrock. Amanda's drawings showed a hollow. After careful demolition, he found a shaft descending into blackness. Carved stone older than colonists, older than maps of this shore, older than any honest version of Gotham's beginning. He descended alone. The walls below were wrong, too smooth, too precise, covered in the recurring serpent and spire motif. At the edge of vision, the carvings seemed almost to move, not fully alive, but not entirely still either. In a hidden alcove, preserved impossibly well, lay Solomon Wayne's journal. Bruce opened it beneath a light that felt weaker underground. The entries were written in a hand growing more frantic with each page. "We are not founders," one line read. "We are jailers." Another. "Every street and grotesque placed above serves as a bar in the cage." And beneath that, the most troubling thought of all. "I fear we have built not a prison, but a pressure valve." The deeper Bruce went, the less Gotham resembled a human city. The walls began to show pictographs of something like urban anatomy. Buildings as organs, roads as veins, towers as teeth. At the end of a descending tunnel, he stepped into a chamber vast enough to swallow every certainty he had left. Children's toys covered the floor, hundreds of them. Dolls from different centuries, tin soldiers, wooden horses, modern plastic figures. All placed in precise positions across the stone, as though arranged into a grand, invisible blueprint. On the far wall were names Wayne, Elliot, Cobblepot, Crane, Kane, each followed by dates separated by 13 years. Always 13. The next thread led him to a restoration company in Gotham's East End. Marcus Pinckney, descendant of the old architect, waited there among original blueprints inked on parchment that looked disturbingly like skin. He spoke of Gotham not as architecture, but as theology. Not as a seal broken, but as a temple completed. According to him, the founders had misunderstood what lay beneath the city. They had not built a prison over a sleeping power. They had built a cage around a god. And gods, Pinckney said with a smile, that was all angles and stone dust, do not forgive. The lights failed. When they returned, Pinckney had vanished, leaving only blueprints that showed Gotham in its truest monstrous intent. A city designed to become a doorway. The children returned one by one. Amanda, Thomas Cobblepot, Sarah Elliott. Each of them spoke dead languages. Each of them drew part of a larger design. Together their sketches formed not merely a city plan, but a ritual. Batman carried the pages to Arkham, to an old, forgotten wing, where a man over 100 years old still breathed through machines no one remembered how to maintain. Amadeus Arkham Jr. He had waited, it seemed, for a Wayne to come. He told Bruce what the founders had done. They had made a bargain with something ancient beneath the island. They built Gotham as both seal and offering. Madness, violence, endless cycles of crime. These were not mere failures of society. They were food. The city's darkness was not incidental. It was part of the contract that kept the deeper things sleeping. Batman left Arkham with cold certainty settling into his bones. Every criminal he had fought, every villain returned again and again. Every loop of violence Gotham could never quite break. Perhaps it had never been meant to break. That night, Oracle called to say every returned child was walking north through the city. Batman saw them from the cathedral heights. Small, pajama-clad figures moving with terrible calm through intersections and alleys, untouched by rain, converging on Gotham Cemetery. Above them, the Gargoyles began to crack. The first one fell into Robinson Park and rose again, as something between stone and flesh. Its limbs bent in impossible rhythms. Its eyes were wet and aware. Batman fought it, but each blow seemed absorbed into a body that redistributed force like living architecture. Then it bowed, not to him as an enemy, to him as something recognized, to Wayne blood. In the cemetery, the children formed a circle among the oldest graves. Their fingers drew in the air, and where their hands passed, light remained. Light with no proper color, light that cast shadows upward. The ground opened beneath them, not into soil, into worked stone, into a hollow city beneath the city. What Bruce saw there could not be held in one shape. His mind broke it apart into details simply to survive looking at it. Towers that were also limbs, streets that pulsed, mouths hidden in plazas, eyes embedded in walls. A vastness at the center that fed on Gotham's accumulated terror over centuries. Pinckney emerged beside it, transformed by what he served. He explained it almost reverently. The city above had always been only the skin. The true Gotham, the first Gotham slept beneath. Every horror on the streets above had fed it. Every tragedy had shaped it. Every fear had made it stronger. And now it was ready to rise. Batman had only one place left to go. Down, deeper than the cave. Beneath Wayne Manor, beneath the platforms and computers and Riverstone, he found the original sealed chamber, circular, black stone at the center, serpent and spire carved into every surface. Solomon Wayne had left not merely warnings, but instructions. The city, Bruce understood at last, was not only a prison. It was a contract. Someone had to serve as guardian. Someone had to stand between Gotham's chosen human madness and the ancient hunger below. Bruce carved the old symbol into his palm with a batarang. Blood touched stone. The chamber answered. The presence that met him did not speak in words. It pressed against his consciousness like ocean depth. It showed him Gotham's entire history as nourishment. Murders, laughter, fear, obsession, masks, the Joker, Two-Face, Arkham, Crime Alley. All of it part of an offering stretching back generations. But Bruce Wayne did what Wayne blood had always done best at its finest. He renegotiated. No more feeding on innocent suffering. No more taking children. No more driving the city toward awakening. In exchange, Gotham would continue to have a guardian. Not merely a man in a suit, a myth, a story powerful enough to satisfy what lay below. Batman offered himself as that story, as the city's living gargoyle, as legend instead of sacrifice, as fear shaped toward protection. The bargain was accepted. Stone climbed his arm like cold fire. Above, the children collapsed safely into sleep. The rising city sank back beneath the cemetery. The gargoyles froze once more upon their ledges. And Batman changed. Not dead, not fully stone, not fully flesh. Something in between. When dawn came, Gotham remained itself. Mad, dangerous, human. But the deeper hunger now fed on myth rather than pain. That night, on Street Mary's Cathedral, a new gargoyle appeared, larger than the rest, shaped faintly like a bat with wings half spread in endless watchfulness. And when darkness returned, its eyes opened. Batman descended into Gotham again. Guardian, gargoyle, forever. Story 3. The Fall of the Old Order. The Penguin liked to look at Gotham from above. From his penthouse, the city seemed quieter than it really was. Softer, less like a wounded creature, and more like a glittering machine. Its towers held the last traces of evening light. Its streets below glowed in wet ribbons of gold and red. The river reflected the skyline in long, broken streaks. And from that height, Gotham almost looked calm. Almost. Oswald Cobblepot stood by the tall glass window with a crystal tumbler in his hand and allowed himself a rare, private feeling. satisfaction. Carmine Falcone was dead. Moroni was gone. The old guard of Gotham's criminal empire had been stripped away piece by piece. Not through spectacle, not through reckless violence, but through patience, quiet pressure, the kind of power that moved like water, finding every weakness, every crack, every place something old could be worn down. That was how Oswald preferred things. Not loud, not messy, controlled. He took a slow sip of his drink and watched the city he believed he had finally carefully reshaped. Across Gotham, deep beneath Wayne Manor, Bruce Wayne stared at a very different view. The Batcave glowed with cold blue light. Screens cast pale reflections over stone walls and steel surfaces. Crime scene photos covered one display. Financial records filled another. Dates, names, property transfers, shell companies, and old family connections spread outward in a pattern that still resisted full explanation. At first, each death in Gotham's underworld had looked isolated. An accident, a collapse, a betrayal, a coincidence. But Bruce had learned long ago that Gotham hid its intent beneath noise. If something looked random often enough, it usually meant someone had worked very hard to make it appear that way. Alfred set a fresh cup of coffee beside him. For a moment, Bruce said nothing. His eyes stayed fixed on the glowing evidence, trying to feel the shape of the thing before him. Then Alfred spoke in that measured, careful tone he used when the truth was both useful and unwelcome. "Perhaps, sir, you are looking only at the deaths, and not at what they replaced." Bruce turned slightly in his chair. "What do you mean?" Alfred hesitated, but only briefly. "There was a time, Master Bruce, when Wayne Enterprises had relationships with certain elements of Gotham society. Your father worked to sever many of them, but roots run deeper than intentions." Bruce looked back at the screens. He opened older files, much older. Ledgers pulled from archived storage. Contracts written in clean corporate language. Development agreements, security provisions, civic partnerships. Each document, on its own, sounded respectable. But together they told a more troubling story. Protection money disguised as consultation fees. Real estate deals made possible by mob pressure. Construction contracts routed through fronts no honest company would ever openly acknowledge. Gotham had not merely grown beside corruption. In places, it had grown through negotiation with it. Bruce felt the ground inside him shift. He had always known Gotham was compromised. That much was obvious to anyone who had spent even 1 week inside its bones. But there was a difference between understanding the city had been shaped by darkness and realizing his own family name had helped shape some of that darkness into structure. The next morning, Gotham received another disturbance. Not a crime. A man, Michael Wayne, returned to the city like someone stepping back into a room he had never stopped believing belonged to him. The Gotham Gazette ran his face across the front page. The prodigal Wayne, the forgotten heir, the polished cousin from the edges of the family tree. At Wayne Tower, cameras flashed in white bursts as Michael approached the podium. He was tall, composed and dressed with the kind of ease that only worked when the wearer truly believed in his own importance. His smile was warm enough for television. His eyes were not. He spoke well, too well. He praised Gotham. He praised the Wayne legacy. He praised Bruce in that smooth, careful way one praises a man while quietly suggesting he is not enough. He spoke of vision, of renewal, of restoring purpose. To the public, he sounded reassuring. To Bruce, watching the coverage later from the cave, he sounded dangerous. To Oswald Cobblepot, watching from a muted screen inside the Iceberg Lounge, he sounded like trouble. Victor stood nearby in the shadows, waiting as always. "What do we know about him?" Oswald asked. Victor cleared his throat lightly. Not much solid. Years off the radar, rumors of bad company, deals in places that don't keep records, a lot of smoke. Oswald watched Michael smile on the television. "Then keep eyes on him," he said. "Every move, every whisper. I want to know what sort of man comes back to Gotham smiling like that." The answer arrived quickly. Michael was not interested in simply reclaiming a family place at the table. He wanted the whole room. He moved through Gotham's social and criminal worlds with unnerving skill. In boardrooms, he spoke of strategic renewal. In charity halls, he spoke of civic responsibility. In private clubs, where the children of old crime families still drank beneath portraits of dead men and ruined empires, he spoke of legacy in a different voice. He spoke of what had been taken, of what had softened, of how Gotham had grown weak under men who no longer understood its true nature. He promised restoration, and Gotham, tired and suspicious and always vulnerable to strong voices in weak times, listened. Bruce soon found himself fighting on two fronts. By day, he endured rising pressure within Wayne Enterprises as board members floated Michael's name with increasing seriousness. By night, Batman tracked a pattern of quiet meetings, revived loyalties, and underworld channels reawakening under Michael's influence. The worst part was not that Michael was persuasive. It was that he understood Gotham's oldest instinct. If you could convince people the present was broken enough, they would begin to romanticize even the ugliest parts of the past. The Penguin moved first. He arranged a meeting on a rooftop in hard rain, because in Gotham, almost every serious conversation eventually found its way to a rooftop. Batman arrived in silence. Cobblepot stood near the edge, umbrella twirling slowly in one gloved hand, his posture almost relaxed. "Unusual weather," he said mildly. Batman's stare did not shift. "What do you want?" Oswald smiled thinly. "A practical arrangement. Michael Wayne is stirring up forces I've spent a great deal of effort containing." "Containing," Batman said. Oswald gave a small shrug. "Civilizing, if you prefer. The point is the same. He wants old chaos. I prefer orderly profit." Batman said nothing. He hated the logic because it was logic. Cobblepot took one small step closer, his voice lowering. "Help me keep him from tearing Gotham open, and I'll help you keep the worst of what follows from spilling into the streets." It was not trust. It was not honor. It was necessity wrapped in disgust. And after a long silence, Batman accepted. For a while, the arrangement worked. Weapons shipments tied to Michael's growing network were intercepted. Safe houses fell. Recruitment hubs were broken apart before they could fully mature. Information flowed through Cobblepot's channels into Batman's hands, and Batman used it with the cold efficiency of a man telling himself over and over that utility was not the same as compromise. But each success left behind an unpleasant taste. Nightwing noticed. "This isn't you, Bruce," Dick said one evening in the cave. "You can dress it up however you want, but you're letting Cobblepot shape the field. Even Alfred, loyal as always, let concern show through. One does not handle poison repeatedly, sir, without risking some of it entering the blood." Bruce heard them. He did, but Gotham grew calmer, at least on the surface, and calm in Gotham had a way of becoming its own temptation. Crime dipped. Businesses stayed open later. certain neighborhoods slept easier. And that fragile peace, however compromised, felt real enough to keep going. Then Michael escalated. The first new massacre carried the style of an old Falcone retaliation no one had seen in years. Then a Wayne Tech warehouse exploded in a pattern that echoed bombings from decades earlier. Then old symbols, old methods, old blood-soaked messages began appearing across the city, as though Gotham itself were being forced to remember its worst chapters. It was not random violence, it was curation. Michael was dragging the past back into the present and weaponizing nostalgia. And each time another incident shook the city, Michael appeared in public afterward with polished outrage, offering strong words, clear promises, and the expression of a man somehow untouched by the chaos that benefited him. Batman saw the plan. Break trust in the present, romanticize the past, then offer yourself as the bridge between them. Meanwhile, Bruce's own discoveries about the Wayne family history began surfacing in public in pieces. Documents leaked, old agreements resurfaced. Reporters connected family wealth to buried criminal arrangements and forgotten civic compromises. The city began feeding on the unraveling of the Wayne myth. Michael waited until the wound was deep enough. Then he made it public. At the Gotham Convention Center, under harsh stage lights and before a packed room of cameras, reporters, board members, and city officials, Michael Wayne exposed the family record. Ledgers, contracts, payoffs, private notes, fragments of history arranged with theatrical precision into a single devastating narrative. Some of it was true, some of it was selective. Some of it Bruce himself had only just begun to understand. But Michael was not interested in complexity. He was interested in effect, and the effect was immediate. Wayne Enterprises' stock plummeted. Protesters gathered. Commentators filled the air with words like corruption, dynasty, inherited guilt, collapse. Across town, Oswald Cobblepot watched the coverage with a face gone nearly expressionless. He understood at once that this was no longer scandal. It was war. Michael's supporters struck first and hard. Penguin operations were attacked. Old loyalties shifted. Retaliation came swiftly. Within days, Gotham slipped into open gang conflict. Not the chaotic kind born from impulse, but the colder, more organized kind born from inheritance, memory, and ambition. Batman moved through it all like a dark splinter, trying to contain fires that rose faster than he could stamp them out. Every punch thrown against Michael's men felt tangled in family shame. Every move made to limit Cobblepot's response felt like handing ground to something worse. He was no longer choosing between right and wrong. He was choosing between fractures. And Gotham, as always, widened them. The final confrontation came at Wayne Tower. Rain swept across the observation deck in silver sheets. The city below glimmered through glass and darkness, vast and indifferent. Michael stood waiting, gun in hand, whatever remained of his polished public image finally stripped away. The Penguin arrived moments later from the opposite side, umbrella concealing steel and ambition. Batman stepped between them and knew at once that words were done. Michael raged about legacy, about ownership, about the city belonging to the Waynes, about Bruce being too weak to claim what should have been his by blood. The fight that followed was vicious and desperate and ugly in the way real fights always are when ideology has burned down into panic. Michael fired wildly. Cobblepot struck whenever openings appeared. Batman moved between them, blocking, redirecting, preventing the worst where he could. For one brief, flashing moment, under lightning and rain, it felt less like three men fighting and more like three different visions of Gotham colliding in one place. Then Michael slipped. Just enough. His footing went on the slick metal edge. Batman lunged on instinct, not from politics or family loyalty, but from something older and more human. Michael twisted in fear and hatred and fired one last shot. The recoil carried him backward. Then he was gone. His scream vanished into storm and distance. For a few seconds afterward, only the rain remained. Batman and the Penguin stood facing one another with the dead city wind around them, both understanding that the immediate danger had ended and the deeper damage had only just begun. In the days that followed, Bruce Wayne did something Gotham did not expect. He did not deny. He did not retreat fully into silence. He called a public conference on the steps of City Hall and spoke plainly, not perfectly, not grandly, but honestly. He acknowledged corruption in the family's past. He acknowledged inherited compromise. He acknowledged that wealth often survives by burying the names of those it stepped over. Then he outlined change, oversight, independent review, loss of unilateral control, real community representation. Wayne Enterprises would not continue as a protected monument to family mythology. The city did not forgive overnight. Of course it didn't, but something shifted. The old game had cracked. Even Oswald Cobblepot understood that survival now meant adaptation, not empire. He stepped back from dreams of overt rule and reshaped himself into something subtler, less king than broker, less throne than whisper. And 1 year later, when Batman stood high above Gotham and looked down at the city lights, he no longer saw only a battlefield. He saw a city trying, awkwardly and painfully, to survive the truth. And perhaps that was the beginning of something better. Story 4. The Punchline. June first began like many days at the precinct. Too early, too much coffee, too much fluorescent light falling over tired desks and older paperwork. Detective Marcus Caney arrived before most of the noise had fully gathered, hoping for an hour of quiet with reports and stale caffeine before the city remembered itself and started causing trouble again. The bullpen already held that familiar tension, though. Not loud tension, not visible panic, something subtler. The kind that made people speak half a tone lower and walk a little faster than usual. Gordon called him into the office before he had even taken 2 proper sips of coffee. There are silences, Marcus would later think, that tell you bad news before anyone says a word. Gordon had one of those silences on him. He stood by the desk, tired eyes, heavy shoulders, a folder waiting between them. Marcus sat. Gordon slid the folder across. Marcus opened it and knew immediately. Crime scene photos, witness statements, patterns of cruelty arranged with theatrical precision. A certain kind of humor soaked into blood and fear. The Joker was back. A task force was being assembled. Sarah Reeves would be his partner. Marcus looked through the office glass and saw Sarah at her desk already watching. She leaned against the edge of it with that focused stillness she always had, like she was already thinking 10 moves ahead, while everyone else was still naming the game. She gave him a small nod. He returned it. That was how it started. Not with an explosion, not with manic laughter in the streets, just a folder, a nod, and the quiet knowledge that Gotham had opened one of its oldest wounds again. The first 2 weeks were a blur of long hours and thin sleep. The Joker did not return in a single grand entrance. He arrived the way poison enters water, in traces at first. A note left in the wrong place, A body posed in a way only he would find funny. A witness whose eyes had gone too wide and stayed that way. Everywhere the same feeling lingered, like the city was being watched by someone patient enough to let fear ripen. One morning, Marcus and Sarah were sent to interview a street vendor who had seen something in an alley the night before. The man sat beside his cart, as if sleep had not visited him in days. His hands shook when he tried to hold a cup. His eyes kept darting toward the mouth of the alley, then to the rooftops, then back again. Marcus stayed calm. Sarah crouched nearby, steady and patient. Eventually, the man began to speak. At first it was rambling, broken fragments. Then one line emerged clearly. "He was there," the vendor whispered, just standing there laughing, not even loud, like he was laughing at something only he knew. I tried to move. He leaned close, so close I could smell the paint. And he said, "You're the Punchline." Marcus wrote the sentence down word for word. "You're the Punchline." Then the man said the Joker had simply walked away. No attack, no threat, no demand, just that one line, delivered like a private joke and left behind like an infection. Back at the precinct, Marcus turned the phrase over again and again in his head. The Joker usually liked spectacle, noise, theatre, public collapse. But this felt different, smaller, sharper, like a blade instead of a hammer. Sarah noticed something else. A shard of glass near the vendor's cart. Tiny, jagged, easy to miss. She held it carefully under the desk lamp and frowned. "The Joker doesn't leave details by accident," she said. Marcus watched the shard catch the light and felt something unpleasant settle behind his ribs. That night he stayed late, rereading notes long after most of the bullpen had emptied. The phrase would not leave him. "You're the Punchline." It was not a threat exactly. It was worse. It was a role. By July, the case had become the center of his life, without Marcus ever fully noticing when the edges disappeared. He stopped going home except to change clothes and stare at ceilings he no longer found restful. Coffee became less of a habit and more of a survival fluid. His hands had begun to shake slightly when he was still. Patterns started surfacing, names repeated, old politicians, businessmen, a few cops, locations that looked unrelated until viewed together on the same map. Marcus became convinced the Joker was not simply causing chaos. He was arranging something. A long joke, a city-sized joke, one in which everyone played a part whether they knew it or not. Sarah saw the change in him before he admitted it to himself. "You're reaching," she told him one night while he stood over a table littered with marked-up files and coffee rings. "You're trying to make every thread connect because you need it to." Marcus shook his head. "They do connect, I know they do. Or you need them to, because the alternative is that he's still ahead of us and always has been." He didn't answer, because that was also true. Later that same week, they interviewed Councilman Callahan, one of Gotham's old political survivors, the kind of man who always looked as though corruption had tried to stain him and merely made him more polished. He listened to their questions with faint amusement. Then he said something Marcus could not stop hearing afterward. "The Joker isn't the disease," Callahan said. "He's the symptom. Gotham needs people like him. Needs Batman too. One exposes the rot. The other pretends to contain it. It's a cycle. You take one away, the city just invents another." Sarah's expression hardened immediately. Marcus, however, felt something colder. Not agreement, not exactly, but recognition of a certain terrible logic. On the drive back, Sarah looked out the window for a long while before saying quietly, Don't let him get in your head. Marcus didn't respond, because Gotham was already in his head. The Joker was simply moving furniture around. By late July, Marcus had stopped sleeping properly. He dreamed in broken alleys and grinning mouths and witnesses whose faces blurred into one another. Often the Joker was there, not speaking, just watching. Smiling as though Marcus were taking far too long to understand a joke everyone else had already heard. Then came the card. Marcus returned to his apartment after midnight, tired enough to feel hollow. He opened the door and knew at once something was wrong. Not because the lock was broken, not because anything obvious had moved, because the air felt occupied. He crossed the room slowly, keys still in hand. And there, placed neatly at the center of his desk, was a single playing card. The Joker. Its painted grin looked up at him from the cheap white paper with obscene confidence. Marcus stood frozen. His apartment was not a fortress, but it was careful. He checked locks. He checked windows. He had habits now, nervous habits, but habits that made him feel he still had some say over the boundaries of his own life. The card erased that comfort instantly. He wanted to call Sarah. He almost did. But what could he say? That the Joker had entered his home without leaving any sign. That he had begun hearing footsteps when no one was there. That he no longer trusted silence because it felt full of observation. He sat awake instead. The card remained on the desk. And sometime before dawn, Marcus realized the Joker had already done what he needed to do. He had entered the detective's mind more effectively than any locked room. In August, the task force began to fracture. Marcus pushed harder. Sarah pushed back. He wanted unorthodox methods, faster action, riskier leads, pressure where pressure was not yet legally justified. She refused. Not because she lacked urgency, but because she understood what he was becoming, while he still believed he was merely becoming effective. One night, in the mostly empty precinct, the argument finally broke open. "We can't keep doing this by the book," Marcus said, voice low but sharp. "He knows the book better than we do now. He wants us slow. He wants us careful. And once we stop being careful," Sarah replied, "what exactly do we become?" He turned toward her, exhausted and angry. "Whatever it takes." She stared at him for a long moment. That's what men say, right before they stop knowing who they are. The words hit harder than he expected. She left. He stayed. And later, after midnight, Marcus did what he had already decided to do hours earlier. He broke into a suspect's house without a warrant. It was a low-level thug with loose ties to Joker channels, nothing solid enough for legal action, and enough wrongness in his behavior to convince Marcus there was something hidden just beyond reach. The search turned up scraps, notes, a location, enough, Marcus believed, to justify everything. When Gordon found out, the reprimand was immediate. Formal warning, protocol violation, psychological evaluation. Sarah filed a separate concern report recommending leave. Marcus read the paperwork like it had been written about someone else. Stress, paranoia, obsessive focus, compromised judgment. He hated that parts of it were true. He hated even more that none of it made the Joker less real. The raid on the warehouse took place in October. It was based on the information Marcus had found in the illegal search. 12 officers, dark approach, simultaneous breach. By the book, at least in the final execution. And from the first second, it was wrong. Booby traps, explosive charges, smoke bombs, angles of fire already prepared. The building had been set for them like a stage. Officers were injured. No suspects found. No sign the Joker had been there recently at all. It was not a hideout. It was a message. Back in the aftermath, Marcus insisted someone inside the department had leaked the operation. It was the only explanation that made sense to him. The precision was too exact, the timing too clean. Maybe he was right. Maybe he was not. That was the cruelty of Gotham and the Joker alike. Truth always arrived tangled. By November, Marcus had begun keeping less of a diary and more of a scattering of fragments. Dates lost shape. Papers gathered in unstable piles around his apartment. He reread witness statements until words seemed to loosen from their meanings. He stopped trusting clocks, stopped trusting footsteps in hallways, stopped trusting his own certainty but clung to it anyway because the alternative was emptiness. Sarah visited once, or maybe twice. He wasn't sure. He remembered only the look in her eyes, concern, frustration, sadness, as though she was standing at the edge of a room he had already left. Then came the attack. Downtown, night. A lead that felt almost too clean. Explosions placed with perfect cruelty. Debris, fire, recorded laughter blaring through hidden speakers. And over it all, the message that had haunted Marcus from the beginning. Gotham is a joke, and Kane is the punchline. Sarah was badly hurt, shielding him from falling debris. Collapsed lung, broken bones, blood loss. Marcus, physically less damaged, reached the hospital in a daze and felt something inside him finally crack in a way quieter than madness, but perhaps closer to it than anything that had come before. Hours later, sometime near dawn, he left the hospital without permission. No clearance, no notice. He simply walked out. After that, time blurred. He hid in his apartment at first, then in places he no longer clearly remembered. Papers gathered around him. Notes looped back on themselves. He began to understand the Joker not as a man to be caught, but as a force that had been leading him from the beginning. Every clue, every phrase, every failure, every humiliation. The Joker had not been running from Marcus. He had been shaping him. Sarah, in his mind, became the last clean thing he had failed. Gordon became the voice of systems too slow and too blind. Batman became one more symbol in a city built entirely of symbols. By the time Marcus finally saw the pattern clearly, it no longer felt like revelation. It felt like surrender. "The city is rotten," he wrote in one final fragmented entry. "The system is rotten. Gotham doesn't need another good man trying to clean it. It needs someone who understands the joke. It needs the punchline." When the Gotham Gazette reported in December that the Joker had struck again with a mysterious new accomplice by his side, the rumor spread before the police could stop it. Former detective Marcus Caney, missing, turned, seen in shadow beside a familiar grin. Sarah Reeves, still recovering, vowed to find him. Gordon vowed to bring both men in. And somewhere in the sleeping machinery of Gotham, laughter moved softly through the dark. Not loud, not wild, just patient. As though the city had completed another one of its long, cruel jokes. And far away from the precinct where this story had started with a folder and a nod, Marcus Caney stepped deeper into the shadows, no longer fully certain where the Joker ended and the punchline began. Story 5, The Silence over Gotham. The sun had almost disappeared behind Gotham's skyline when the city went silent. Not gradually, not in the ordinary way evening softens sound, not the natural hush that settles over rooftops when the day begins to loosen its grip. This was sudden, complete, unnatural. One moment Gotham was itself, restless, loud, layered with sirens and engines and footsteps and vendors and half-heard arguments drifting through open windows. The next, it was as if some great invisible hand had reached down and pressed the whole city into stillness. Cars still moved, people still walked, traffic lights still changed from red to green. But the sound was gone. A woman crossing the street opened her mouth in surprise and heard nothing of her own voice. A bus driver leaned on the horn and felt only the pressure beneath his hand. A street musician struck a chord and watched his fingers move in mute disbelief. Even the usual distant cry of police sirens vanished, as though the very air had stopped carrying the idea of noise. For a brief and terrible moment, all of Gotham became a moving picture, alive, but voiceless. Panic, when it began, had no sound either. That made it worse, because fear without noise becomes harder to measure. It spills into faces, into eyes, into frantic gestures. It spreads in the speed of movement and the confusion of crowds. It lives in the way strangers begin to look at one another when the world behaves in a way no one can explain. People pulled out phones only to find their screens dead or frozen. Radios hissed with static. Televisions flickered with blank, incomprehensible images. In apartment towers, office lobbies, train stations, bars, and convenience stores, Gotham's people stood suspended in disbelief. Then motion returned all at once. Cars collided, pedestrians ran, children cried in silence. Police officers shouted orders they themselves could not hear. Above the chaos, Wayne Tower gleamed in the last wounded traces of sunset. Inside one of its upper conference rooms, Bruce Wayne sat at the long polished table in the middle of a board meeting when the silence arrived. He saw lips continue moving around him. He saw the presenter click to the next slide and turn with an expression of confusion. He watched a room full of powerful people discover, at exactly the same time, that none of them could hear anything. Bruce rose immediately. By the time he reached the hallway, he already understood one thing. This was not a technical problem. It was too complete, too precise, too total. When he stepped into his private elevator and checked his phone, the dark screen merely confirmed what instinct had already told him. Someone had done this. Someone had reached into the pulse of Gotham and cut out one of its oldest and most essential parts. In the Batcave, the silence felt heavier. The cave had always known quiet, but this was not quiet. It was pressure. It clung to stone and steel. It made every movement feel strangely detached from consequence. Bruce descended into the heart of it and began working at once, screens glowing around him, while the city above stumbled through mute confusion. Alfred joined him within minutes. The two men adapted quickly, as men do when adaptation is the only useful response left. Alfred brought notepads, marker boards, archive diagrams, and old communication protocols from another era. Bruce typed, Alfred wrote. They passed notes back and forth under the cold cave light, like scholars working inside a dream. It did not take long to identify the pattern. The silence had a source, not one source, but many. Signal disruptions were radiating through Gotham in a coordinated field, suppressing sound transmission and interfering with consumer electronics at the same time. It was elegant in a terrifying way. Not crude sabotage, not random interference, a citywide design. A name surfaced from buried Wayne Enterprises records. Dr. Lynette Keyes. The project she had once worked on had been filed under Environmental Systems Research, intended to reduce severe urban noise pollution in some of Gotham's densest districts. Even in its early conceptual stages, it had been considered too dangerous for public deployment. The technology could create controlled acoustic null zones, areas where sound simply failed to function normally. Too unstable, too vulnerable to abuse, too tempting to anyone who believed society would be improved by force. Dr. Keyes had been brilliant, obsessive, and eventually dismissed. After that, she had disappeared. Now Gotham was hearing the consequences of her absence in the form of absolute silence. Then the screens changed. Across the city, giant electronic billboards and skyscraper displays flickered to life. In place of ads and transit alerts came a single masked figure, wearing a dark helmet with black glass over the eyes. The face did not move in any familiar human way, but text began scrolling beneath it in clean white letters. People of Gotham, for too long you have been enslaved by noise. The figure called itself the Silencer. The message continued. This city has mistaken endless stimulation for life, endless distraction for progress, endless noise for meaning. I have given you peace. I have given you stillness. You should be thanking me. Bruce read the words without expression, but Alfred, standing just behind him, let one eyebrow rise in grim recognition. There it was. Not merely revenge, not merely power. Conviction. That made her more dangerous. By the next hour, Gotham had already begun to adapt badly. At GCPD, Gordon established an improvised rooftop command station. Flashlights became signal lamps. Dry erase boards replaced shouted orders. Officers fell back on old hand signals, paper notes, and frantic eye contact. In ordinary times, the police relied on radio chatter like blood in the veins. Now they worked as though some part of the city had been rolled backward by a century. Batman arrived in darkness. His cape moved behind him like a second shadow. Gordon turned and nodded once, relief showing in his face more than in any gesture. Batman laid out a map, critical nodes, likely transmitters. Clusters of interference spread through Gotham like a web. The field was strongest at several key locations. Old relay stations, rooftops, maintenance hubs, abandoned service corridors, and one suspicious concentration near the old industrial subway lines under the city. They began there. What followed was perhaps the strangest night of coordinated action Gotham had ever seen. Police teams moved through silent intersections using flash pulses as position checks. Batman crossed from roof to roof with typed messages appearing on a compact display at his wrist. Gordon's units disabled some of the smaller field generators one by one. Each time a node went dark, a tiny portion of the city seemed to breathe again, though sound itself still did not fully return. Batman tracked one signal to a warehouse near the river. The building stood alone among rusting fences and puddled concrete, the sort of place Gotham manufactured endlessly, half-forgotten industrial husks too useful to demolish and too empty to love. Inside, he found the Silencer. The suit came first in his perception. Sleek, black, layered with acoustic dampening surfaces and reactive shielding. Its movement was disturbingly clean, like someone had removed all wasted human motion from a body and replaced it with efficient intention. The fight that followed was unlike most fights Batman had known. No grunts, no impacts, no shouted exertion, only movement, only flashes of force, only the visual language of violence stripped completely of sound. It made the whole thing feel more dreamlike and more brutal at once. The Silencer moved with speed enhanced by her suit's engineering. Batman adapted. He always adapted. Yet each blow that should have announced itself arrived in eerie mute succession. Crates split open without a crash. Metal bars met armored gauntlets without a clang. Glass burst in the dark and fell like invisible rain. When at last she escaped, vanishing through a maintenance exit and deeper into the industrial arteries of Gotham, Batman was left with one thing: a fragment of her technology. Small, warm, still humming with the ghost of a field too advanced and too wrong. Back in the Batcave, Bruce and Lucius Fox examined it together. Lucius arrived with the expression of a man who already suspected the truth and hated that suspicion enough to hope he was wrong. He wasn't. The device had unmistakable Wayne architecture at its core, repurposed, expanded, weaponized far beyond the original scope. The quiet field had been built from a buried Wayne project, then refined by someone brilliant enough to make the impossible almost elegant. Alfred, continuing his separate research, filled in the human part of the story. Dr. Lynette Keyes had not simply been a dismissed scientist. She had been a woman broken by grief. Her husband, Mark, had once worked alongside her in advanced systems development. Brilliant, restless, consumed by ideas. At some point, his obsession with the quiet field ceased to be academic and became devotional. He pushed the work too far. One night in a private lab, an experimental overload killed him. After that, Lynette had changed. What may once have been sincere idealism hardened into ideology. She came to believe the modern world itself had killed him. Not just the accident, but the culture of endless stimulation, technological noise, perpetual velocity. She no longer wanted to manage sound. She wanted to silence it, not as punishment, as correction. Below Gotham, in abandoned subway tunnels, she had built her cathedral. The old tunnels stretched beneath the city like buried memory. Stations sealed for decades. Maintenance corridors rusted shut. Forgotten switching chambers and relay rooms hidden under tons of concrete and history. That was where Batman went next. He carried with him a countermeasure device, a compact field generator that created a small bubble of low-frequency vibration around his body. It did not restore the city's voice, but it let him exist inside something other than perfect suppression. A hum, a thin line of resistance against total silence. The tunnels were not empty. They held frightened citizens who had fled downward, believing underground shelter safer than the streets. They held petty criminals unraveling under the pressure of absolute quiet. They held people on the edge of panic, who looked at Batman not with their usual mixture of fear and relief, but with the stunned gaze of those who had begun to feel abandoned by ordinary reality. He guided who he could towards safer exits. Then he kept going. The deeper sections of the tunnel complex changed shape in disturbing ways. Old stations had been transformed into relay chambers. Equipment-lined platforms where no trains would ever come again. Screens glowed with mute data streams. Wires crawled up tile walls like roots. Broadcast hubs pulsed in perfect rhythm with the citywide field above. At the center waited Dr. Lynette Keyes herself. Not hidden now, not masked by projection. She stood in a chamber of humming machinery and pale industrial light, the silencer suit framing her like a second skeleton. Her face looked older than her record suggested, grief having done what time alone could not. Batman stepped forward into the edge of the field. Using the countermeasure device, he spoke. "Dr. Keyes, it's over." She looked at him with the peculiar pity of a zealot confronted by someone who still believes compromise is possible. "No," her expression seemed to say, "it is only beginning." The battle in the underground lab was fiercer than the one in the warehouse. Here, the whole environment favored her. Soundless machinery, narrow catwalks, interference bursts, pulses designed to disorient balance and spatial judgment. But Batman had one advantage she did not. He understood obsession. He understood what it meant to mistake pain for purpose. What it meant to build a mission out of grief, because grief alone felt too shapeless to survive. He fought not just her body, but her certainty. The suit amplified speed and resilience, yet it also depended on control. Batman broke that control piece by piece. He drove her away from clean lines and planned motions. He forced improvisation. He used the environment against the system that had been built to dominate it. At the final moment, he severed the suit's synchronization array, and the elegant machinery around her began to fail. Then the central field destabilized. At first, it was only a vibration in the rails. Then a tremor in the lights. Then a rolling collapse through the network. Far above, across Gotham, sound returned in fragments. A horn, a shout, the crash of something falling, the rush of the river. Sirens, voices, footsteps, dogs barking, generators rattling, human panic shifting, at last, into audible life. The city did not receive its voice gracefully. It came back in a rush, too loud, too sudden, almost painful in its abundance. But it came back. Dr. Keyes fell to her knees as the machinery around her dimmed, and the suit lost its authority over the room. Batman stood over her, breathing hard, cape half caught in the draft of failing ventilation systems. She looked small then, not harmless, but human. It was grief that had brought her here. Grief and intellect and the terrible confidence of someone who believed they had the right to decide what kind of world others should live in. He took her into custody with a recommendation Gordon would not entirely like, but would ultimately respect. Psychological care, secure containment, not vengeance. When Batman emerged from the tunnels, dawn was climbing over Gotham. The city sounded bruised. That was the only way to describe it. People stood in streets and on balconies simply listening. Not to anything extraordinary, to ordinary things, engines, birds, wind, distant conversation, the small layered music of daily life. Things they had lost for only a short time, yet long enough to feel how empty the world became without them. In the days that followed, Gotham recovered slowly. Some found the restored noise comforting. Some found it unbearable at first. Arguments broke out over whether silence had been a curse or a mirror. New policies were proposed. Research into ethical sound control resumed under stricter oversight. People spoke more often for a time about listening to one another. Though Gotham, being Gotham, did not hold on to lessons in their purest form for very long. Still, something remained. In the cave, Bruce sat one evening with Alfred and watched screens showing a city returning to itself. "I've been thinking," Bruce said quietly, "about silence and noise, about how both can become dangerous when imposed." Alfred set down a cup of tea. "Indeed, sir. Silence chosen can be restful. Silence enforced can be a prison." Bruce nodded. "And noise ignored becomes another kind of silence. That," Alfred said, "is perhaps the more human lesson of all." Later, Batman stood on a rooftop above Gotham and listened. Not for danger, not immediately, just listened. Sirens in the distance, music from an apartment window, a train passing over an elevated line, wind touching old stone, a child laughing somewhere down below. The city was loud again, chaotic again, alive again. And in that noise, imperfect and constant, Batman heard what Dr. Keyes never had. Not corruption of life, but proof of it. Story 6. The Archivist Gotham was a city that loved monuments, statues, plaques, founders' halls, stone faces looking nobly across civic parks. buildings named after dead men who had made fortunes large enough to be mistaken for virtue. And because Gotham loved monuments, it was also a city built to be wounded by what was written on them. The first act of vandalism seemed almost too small to matter. A historical plaque outside the Gotham Natural History Museum was defaced overnight with a strange symbol. A quill crossed with a key, surrounded by a ring of thorns. Nothing more. No slogan, no explanation, just the mark. By the following morning, 6 more plaques had been altered in the same way. All of them connected to Gotham's founding families. All of them bearing the Wayne name somewhere in their polished official text. Commissioner Gordon brought the photographs to Batman beneath the bat signal in the cold wash of rooftop light. Vandalism, he said, though he didn't sound convinced by the word. There's a pattern here. Someone wants these specific histories touched. Batman examined the images. The symbol was deliberate, cleanly applied, old-looking without being old, like a seal from some forgotten private order. This isn't random, he said. Gordon nodded once. That was my thought too. Then he handed over something else. Security footage from the Gotham Historical Society. On it, just past 3 in the morning, a figure moved through restricted archives and replaced a set of documents with exacting calm. Nothing was stolen. Something was rewritten. A few hours later, a respected historian, Professor Caroline Hughes, was publicly discredited when records she had long relied upon were suddenly shown to contain fabricated sources. It was the first visible fracture. 3 days after that, the city received the real blow. A video appeared online and spread through Gotham with breathtaking speed. It was beautifully made. Historical photographs faded into maps, maps into ledgers, ledgers into animated reconstructions of old land deals, erased neighborhoods, and buried names. A digitally altered voice narrated the story with grave precision. According to the video, Solomon Wayne had orchestrated the displacement of an immigrant settlement to secure the land for an early Wayne shipping operation. Records had been buried. Witnesses had vanished from official history. Public memory had been curated. The voice gave itself a title: The Archivist. History belongs to those who control the archives, it said. And for too long, that history has belonged to the Waynes. Bruce watched the video in the Batcave 3 times before Alfred spoke. The claims, Alfred said carefully, are disturbingly specific. Bruce turned his head. You think there's truth in them? Alfred's answer did not come at once. There are chapters in every great family history, he said at last, that receive more polish than scrutiny. That was not denial. Bruce knew it. And because he knew it, something cold and unsteady opened inside him. The Wayne legacy had always been complicated in the practical sense. Wealth always was. Influence always was. But for Bruce, Thomas and Martha Wayne had long stood at the center of something almost sacred. Not perfection exactly. Something more personal than that. The fixed moral star by which he had steered the rest of his life. Now the sky itself seemed to tremble. The Archivist did not stop with one video. At the annual Wayne Foundation Heritage Gala, held inside a restored old courthouse commissioned by Solomon Wayne, the next strike landed with devastating precision. The room glittered with old wealth and public dignity. Crystal, polished wood, official smiles. Bruce attended because Bruce Wayne had to attend, even as Batman stayed alive beneath the tuxedo like a second pulse. Lucius Fox stepped to the podium for the evening's address. Then the lights failed. When the emergency systems came on seconds later, the great portrait of Solomon Wayne behind the stage had been replaced by an enormous projected political cartoon from the 19th century. In it, Wayne stood smiling atop a mound of bodies while counting gold. Words from a private Wayne journal, never made public, appeared on every screen. Progress demands sacrifice. The room erupted in confusion. Guests shouted, security scrambled, phones came out, and by the time Batman traced the projection source to a maintenance corridor beneath the building, the Archivist was gone, leaving only the quill and key symbol etched into the courthouse cornerstone. That night, Bruce descended into a part of the manor he rarely entered, the family archives. They sat in preserved boxes and cabinets far below the rooms tourists might imagine when they heard the name Wayne Manor. No grandeur there. Only paper, ledgers, letters, contracts, journals. The slow material weight of inheritance. Alfred joined him carrying coffee. "I feared this day would come," he said quietly. Bruce looked up sharply. "You knew?" Alfred gave the smallest nod. Enough to understand that the Wayne story, like Gotham's, was not neat. They opened old boxes together. Letters between Solomon Wayne and Charles Elliot. Land transfers with missing attachments. Tax records with unexplained irregularities. Private correspondence that spoke in civilized language about actions that were anything but civilized. By dawn, the shape of it had become harder to deny. Suspicious acquisitions, political alliances with brutal men, neighborhoods cleared under legal pretexts that concealed greed, profits built atop silence. Bruce sat back at last, hollow-eyed. Did my father know? Alfred did not answer with words. He didn't need to. The Archivist's campaign widened. A Wayne-funded health center faced protest when evidence surfaced that the land beneath it had once belonged to a black-owned business destroyed through manipulated tax codes. A Wayne research facility shut down when historical contamination records revealed toxic dumping concealed for decades. Independent tests confirmed long-suspected illness clusters in the surrounding neighborhood. Each revelation arrived with documentation. Each document bore the weight of irrefutability. Public opinion split down the middle. Some called the Archivist a terrorist. Others called her the first honest historian Gotham had seen in a century. Outside Wayne Tower, protest signs rose in rain and cold. "The foundation is rotten," one read. "History remembers," another said. Bruce Wayne disappeared from public view for several days. Batman, too, seemed absent from the skyline. In the cave, Bruce watched surveillance feeds of Gotham turning in on itself. Commentators shouted. Politicians demanded inquiry. Activists occupied spaces once reserved for donors and elites. The city did not know what to do with truth that arrived sharpened like accusation. Alfred brought food Bruce barely touched. Finally, Bruce spoke, voice low and rough with exhaustion. "How do I separate Batman from the Wayne legacy when Batman was born from it?" Alfred, after a long silence, sat rather than standing as he usually did. The gesture alone carried unusual weight. "Your parents were neither saints nor monsters, sir. They were human beings carrying a burden they did not create and perhaps did not fully understand how to dismantle. Your father had begun asking questions in his final years." Bruce looked up. "And you never told me." "He asked me not to. And after their deaths," Alfred's voice softened, "you built yourself around their memory with such force that I could not bear to fracture it further." Bruce closed his eyes. Betrayal and understanding arrived together, and that was its own kind of pain. The next turn came from Lucius Fox. Wayne internal servers had been breached. Highly restricted archival records downloaded. Files Bruce himself had not yet reviewed. Whoever the archivist was, she was no longer merely exposing old public myths. She was digging through the living body of the Wayne machine. The digital trail she left was too obvious. A trap, but a necessary one. It led Batman to the abandoned original wing of Arkham, one of the oldest surviving structures in Gotham, condemned and scheduled for demolition. Inside its decaying halls, audio systems triggered as he moved, and the Archivist's modulated voice echoed around him. "Gotham's protector arrives," the voice said, the Waynes' final editor. Batman moved through the shadows, following the signal deeper into the ruined records wing. There she was at last. Dr. Elise Crowley, middle-aged, calm, conservatively dressed, surrounded by both antique records and modern equipment. She wore archival gloves as she handled old papers, as though even in war against the Waynes, she would not disrespect the physical dignity of history itself. She looked up without surprise. "Batman, or should I call you Bruce Wayne?" He remained still. "Who are you?" She gestured to a faded photograph beside her. "My great-grandfather was Michael Crowley. He built Crowley Heights in 1911. 90 families lived there. Wayne-backed expansion erased it by 1928. Their names vanished from the record. Ours did not. We preserved what your family erased. The fury in her was not theatrical. That was what made it harder. It had aged with her, organized itself, educated itself, waited. The Waynes are not uniquely evil," she said, "just uniquely successful at burying what they benefited from." Batman listened because he had to. Not because he agreed with everything she intended, but because enough of what she said was true that refusal would have become cowardice. "What do you want?" he asked. "The complete truth," she replied. "Nothing less." Then she showed him the worst document yet. A record from 1797. An atrocity hidden beneath Gotham's official founding mythology. According to the evidence before him, members of the founding families had orchestrated the poisoning of a Miagani settlement in order to secure the land that would become central Gotham. The Waynes' early fortune had grown in the long shadow of that act and, more importantly, in the cover-up that followed. Bruce stood in silence. Even behind the cowl, even hidden under the discipline of Batman, he felt the blow. At last he said, "Even if exposing this is right, what happens after? Gotham tears itself apart." "Sometimes," Elise said, "foundations must be exposed before anything honest can be rebuilt." Before he could stop her, her equipment began to self-destruct in controlled bursts. Smoke rose, sparks flew. Batman pulled her clear of the worst of it on instinct, because that was who he was regardless of legacy or truth. By the time the room stabilized, she had vanished into the chaos, leaving the evidence behind. Then Gotham exploded. Not literally, socially, emotionally, historically. The city convulsed under the weight of it all. Wayne monuments were occupied. Historical sites were re-examined or vandalized. Talk shows, council chambers, dinner tables, and street corners all became arenas for the same argument. What do we do with a legacy built partly on harm? What do we do with truth that cannot be made clean? Bruce disappeared more fully after that. For 3 days, he barely slept. In the cave, he sat before the screens like a man whose shape had survived, but whose center had gone uncertain. Then Alfred said something that shifted the path. "The question is no longer whether Batman should exist," he said. "It is what Batman should stand for now." That same night, another alert arrived. The Gotham Historical Society had been breached again. But this time, when Batman reached the archives, he realized something immediately. Elise Crowley was not there merely to reveal history. She was preparing to replace it. A network of equipment had been installed through the records halls. Massive selective destruction protocols, archival replacements, verified documents mixed with curated emphasis. It was not random sabotage. It was authorship. "This isn't justice," Batman said from the shadows. "It's the same crime in a different direction." Elise did not look away from her work. "I'm correcting the record." "With your own chosen narrative," Batman replied. At last, she faced him fully. "Your family wrote Gotham's myth in stone and money. Why should I not answer with truth? Because truth arranged only to wound becomes another lie," he said. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her expression. Not much, just enough. Then she struck where she knew it would hurt. "You, of all people, should understand performance, Bruce Wayne. A billionaire in a mask beating criminals in alleys, while the systems that made them remain intact." He stood in silence for one long breath. Then he did something no one in the room expected. He removed the cowl. The technicians froze. Elise stared. Bruce Wayne stood before them, not as symbol, but as exhausted human being. "You're right," he said, "about some of it." The admission hit the room harder than denial could have. "The Waynes helped build harm," he continued. "Batman has often treated symptoms rather than causes. But burning every structure down and replacing one curated narrative with another won't heal Gotham. It will only give the city a different myth to worship." She looked at him with deep suspicion. "Why should anyone believe you?" "They shouldn't," Bruce said. "Not without proof." He stepped closer and extended a proposal. An independent historical commission. Not Wayne-controlled. Not Crowley-controlled. Fully public. Transparent, scholars, community representatives, archivists, legal authority. Full access to records. Full publication of truth. The damning parts and the redemptive attempts. The crimes and the course corrections. The harm and the complexity. Not a sanitized legend. Not a weaponized accusation. A full record. For several seconds, the archive room felt suspended outside time. At last, Elise nodded once. "Commission first," she said. "Verified independently. Then we see whether Bruce Wayne is different from the men before him." 2 months later, Gotham was still arguing, but it was arguing differently. The newly formed Gotham Historical Truth and Reconciliation Commission opened in a building that had once belonged only to elites. Wayne Enterprises transferred major oversight authority. Community representatives joined the board. Reparations funds began taking shape for neighborhoods and families demonstrably harmed by historical Wayne actions. Bruce's public reputation remained damaged. Perhaps it always would. But the damage was no longer being covered over with polished marble and family legend. It was being carried openly. Batman returned to Gotham's nights changed, though not diminished. On a rain-slick rooftop, Gordon stood under the bat signal and looked at him for a moment before speaking. "I wasn't sure you'd still answer that thing. Some symbols are worth reclaiming," Batman said. "Or redefining." Gordon nodded. Crime's down, strangely enough. City's still a mess. People are fighting over every street name and statue. But something's changing. "The truth is painful," Batman said. "But pain isn't always destruction." Gordon hesitated. "Then there's one more thing. Dr. Crowley was found dead yesterday. Aneurysm. Natural causes, according to the medical examiner." Batman absorbed that quietly. "Her work continues," he said. "As does yours," Gordon replied. Later, deep in the cave, Bruce installed a new display where the family shrine of memory had once gone unquestioned. A complete Wayne timeline. Triumphs, sins, deals, failures, attempts at reform. No longer hidden in boxes. No longer arranged into comfort. Displayed plainly. Alfred watched from a respectful distance. "Your parents would be proud," he said. Bruce considered that. "Not of everything," he answered, "but maybe of the choice to face it honestly." Alfred inclined his head. "That is what I meant, sir." Above them, Gotham remained what it had always been: beautiful, compromised, hard to love honestly, and worth loving anyway. And when Batman stepped onto a rooftop that night and looked across the city, he no longer saw a place defended by myth alone. He saw a city with difficult truths under its feet. A city that could not be saved by comfortable stories. Only by facing what it was and deciding again and again to build something better from there. And in that harder vision, the Bat still had a purpose. Not to protect innocence that had never existed, but to stand guard over the difficult work of becoming more honest than what had come before. And now, as Gotham grows quieter in your mind, let the city drift farther away. Let the rooftops soften. Let the sirens become distant. Let the gargoyles return to stillness. Let the rain slide gently down the old stone walls, and the night in Gotham goes on, as it always does. Somewhere high above the sleeping city, a dark figure keeps watch. Somewhere a signal glows, and somewhere a story waits for another night. But for now, there is nothing more you need to follow. Nothing more you need to solve. Only rest, only stillness, only the comfort of knowing the city is being watched over while you sleep. So let the last lights dim now. Let the last thoughts grow softer. And drift slowly out beyond the rooftops. Out beyond the rain. Out beyond Gotham. And into sleep.